the research institutes and the universities. And on our first panel, we have a fine selection of professors from the independent research organisations across Scotland. So please, if you would be happy to introduce yourself, where you're from and anything, but we have a short introductory statement. We'll start with you, Professor Roberts.
Hello, my name's Deb Roberts and I'm from the James Hutton Institute, which is a research institute of about 550 people, 100 students based in Dundee and Aberdeen. And I very much welcome...
Perthshire, you mean?
Oh, Perthshire, I'm sorry. And it's great to be invited here to tell you a little bit about the work that we do and some of the issues that we face and some of the opportunities that we think we might bring.
Hi, I'm Alistair Nisbet. I'm the Deputy Director of the Mordun Research Institute, just outside Pennycook, south of Edinburgh. We have about just over 100 scientific staff on the site. I've been there for about 20 years and I'm very much looking forward to discussion today.
Thank you.
And hello everybody, I'm Nicholas Owens. I'm the Executive Director of the Scottish Association for Marine Science, otherwise known as SAMS, based in Oban. I'm a marine scientist myself, and we have 160 staff in Oban and currently 300 plus students. We're a partner of the University of Highlands and Islands, but not legally part of that. We're a separate legal entity.
Okay, well, thank you. And you all do represent our independent research organisations, and it's great to have you all here, I think collectively, possibly for the first time, so who knows. Could you maybe just, and I'll start with you, please, Professor Roberts, maybe just explain to the committee a little bit just about how your relationships with the other academic institutions work, your relationships with the university sector particularly, how it's decided who does what and like what maybe singles the IROs out for specialisation. I know from my experience with regular visits to the Hutton that there is a strong relationship with Dundee University. Maybe you can maybe talk a little bit about that as an example. But what I think we're keen to discover is just how these relationships work and what type of interface that you have with each other, please.
Yep. No, thank you. So all of us are independent research organisations, but I think you'll find that we're all a little bit different, and that's the thing about independent research organisations. We all do, I guess, I want to let my colleagues speak for themselves, but sort of long-term sector-focused research, and that's what makes us a little bit different from the university sector, that we're looking at specific issues. In our case, we're looking at food security, environmental security, water security. And we've been doing that for many, many years, and we are a resource for underpinning national capacity. We curate special germplasm, we look after data sets, we've got the National Soils Archive, and it's that long-term sector focus that I think makes us different from the university sector. We do no teaching as well, we're entirely research focused. But we do work collaboratively, and we fit within, I think, the broader, very special Scottish research ecosystem. We have a very special role within that wider ecosystem, and we have very strong links with lots of universities. With Dundee, we actually, their plant sciences department is actually located on our campus. So there's very close working with that particular department, and in fact the offices are right next door to each other. You wouldn't know where an institute member of staff was and when a university member of staff was.
Is that quite typical of most of the, obviously the other gentlemen can speak for themselves, but is that what you'd see?
I don't think that is very typical, that degree of co-location. But certainly I suspect we've all got very strong links with the universities. We have about 100 PhD students who are accredited by universities across Scotland, across the UK, and actually internationally as well. So we don't have links with just one university, we have many links with the universities, and because of our location, our strongest links in our case are with Dundee, St Andrews and Aberdeen. But we also have links with Edinburgh and actually all of the Scottish universities.
I would imagine for you, Professor Owens, given that you are actually part of the University of the Highlands and Islands, you're pretty much located within. Is again, just how typical is that for IROs? How useful is that in terms of a relationship?
I think again it's atypical actually. I mean we're linked with the University of Highlands and Islands, particularly through the undergraduate programme that we offer, and so compared with our sort of sister type institutes in, say, in England, they would not be teaching undergraduates, whereas we do offer a a marine science degree as part of the University of Highlands. That's pretty unusual for an independent research institute. A bit like my colleagues here, we have PhD students and they can be registered anywhere actually. And so most of our PhD students are with UHI, but actually a lot of them they can be with any research institute, with any university, and that is dependent upon the research collaborations that our staff members have with the wider academic community. So there's no restriction on who we can operate with.
And Professor Nisbet, please answer the question because we probably had time to think about it, but at the same time maybe you could help us just a little bit. Does government understand your distinctiveness as independent research organisations? And for us, we're just finding out a lot about this and how it works and what your relationships are. Do we get it? Do we understand practically just how all this works for yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in common with my colleagues, obviously we do have very close relationships with universities. We are geographically located in the Midlothian Science Zone at Easterbush, which is the highest concentration of livestock science in Europe. So that really fosters those sorts of relationships between us and universities. So the Vet School, University of Edinburgh, the Roslin Institute. We also have close links to the University of Glasgow. I think in terms of does government get it, that we're different, I think they do. What makes us distinct from universities is our stakeholders. So the Mordun, for example, is owned by the Mordun Foundation, which has 11,000 members who are farmers and vets mostly, and they are very clear about what they want us to do, and Scottish Government are very clear with us about what they want us to do in terms of science. So I think they very much understand the nature of independent research organisations and the difference between them and universities.
If I may add, actually, Chair, I think for us, we're slightly different in the sense that I would venture to suggest actually that I don't think government, either the Scottish Government nor the UK Government, actually get us in that sense, in that, one of the things that I've been spending quite a lot of my time doing since becoming the director there about 8 years ago is actually trying to promote actually what a national asset actually that we are as an independent organisation. We've been in place since the late 1880s, and I think it certainly when I've hosted ministers and members of parliament from both governments, without exception, they leave saying, I had no idea, actually, A, what you do, and B, actually what value that you bring. So currently, all of our funding has to be competitively fought for. And so in that sense, we're very much like a university department, frankly. So what we try and do, and we've already heard that one of the distinctive aspects of a research institute is the ability to do long-term studies. That is not what university departments are set up to do, absolutely is what independent institutes are meant to do. And so the ability to obtain the funding for those long-term studies, which you can't do anywhere else, that's the biggest challenge probably all of us face. Actually.
I'm just wondering what Scotland particularly brings to the table when it comes to our independent research organisations. And obviously I'm familiar with the work of Hutton, given it's in my constituency, and the work you do around potatoes, barley particularly. Is there anything that we do which is distinctive, which you could point to as being Scottish about our research that you would like to tell the committee about today? And I could see Professor Owens getting excited about that.
Well, yes. First, it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, and that is I think there is something genuine to be said about the fact that the Scottish Enlightenment actually occurred, and that I genuinely believe that we still are benefiting from that within Scotland in a way that one doesn't see elsewhere. I've been director of institutes in England as well, and there is a distinct difference actually in the culture in the Scottish institutes.
Enlightenment passed without Sir Roberts, and I know that there's going to be some sort of mark, isn't there, from the Hutton Institute for James Hutt's 200 year in Enlightenment. But is there, what makes Scottish research distinctive then? What would we find in Scotland that we might not find in the rest of the UK or like-sized European neighbours?
Well, for me, not for me, but for the James Hutton Institute, there's a really clear answer here because we're looking at natural resources, and Scotland has a very unique set of natural resources. that means that we can do research on those natural resources and try and maximise the benefit of them. So that's renewable energy, it's soils, it's landscape, it's farming infrastructure. And so I think what we're looking at is different to the rest of the UK, and that's why you need, although it's got international relevance, it's really useful having a Scottish Institute looking at that. And I guess in terms of the James Hutton link and the obvious sort of segue there, I think what we've got the benefits at a research institute level of doing interdisciplinary work that looks across issues in a more holistic systems type approach. We don't have some of the, my colleagues will put me right, but within universities, sometimes there are institutional structures which make interdisciplinary working quite difficult. Because of our size, we can have teams, we can get our social scientists working very closely with our natural scientists and not just come up with technical solutions, but social solutions that show how those technical solutions are going to be adopted by farmers, for instance. So, and again, I think there's Scottish dimensions to those behavioural issues as well, which are important.
Just briefly, if you anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree with everything that's been said. I would say from a livestock point of view, then clearly Scotland is very different, and so the research that we do necessarily is very different and very focused often on the livestock sector in Scotland to deliver solutions and tools for that sector, and the research that we perform is therefore very strategic in terms of local application. Of the research, often to global issues, but it's about local application, and I think that makes Scottish IROs very distinctive. We work on endemic disease of livestock. That's unusual. There's such a focus on endemic disease.
Okay, and just lastly from me, I think it came up in the evidence just that, a support for a UK government mapping consultation to better understand the Scottish research landscape. I've seen Professor Roberts nodding, so it might come from the Hutton Institute, but is that something that you would find helpful and you want to maybe ask the committee why we should be looking at that?
I think that would be an excellent idea, actually. I think sometimes the institutes go under the radar somewhat just because of our size, and making it clear how we fit between, say, the public sector research establishments and the UKRI-funded institutes, and showing the distinctions between them would be very, very useful. I just realised I should have said something a bit earlier on about relationships, which is the other thing that the independent research organisations do in Scotland is we work closely with each other. So the Morden and the Hutton jointly deliver, with others as well, the Scottish Research Programme, Strategic Research Programme. So that's another really unique sort of set of relationships within Scotland that goes ahead to deliver a programme of research which is much more than the sum of the projects within that programme. It's not just a set of individual projects, it's more of an added value, holistic thing. Yeah. So that's a really key relationship, and that mapping exercise could show those links as well, I think.
I'm presuming it's taken as said that you agree with the idea about the mapping consultation. Yes?
I think the mapping consultation is essential, to be honest, to understand the landscape, to understand some of the unique facilities that these IROs have and where that fits into the UK picture as a whole. I think if we're serious about a levelling up agenda, then actually that sort of exercise is absolutely essential.
Thank you. Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I apologise to the witnesses and the committee to mention levelling up. I have to be in the chamber very shortly because my constituency got £18.2 million today. So I want to go along and welcome that for Murray. But could I maybe start with you, Professor Nisbet, on Morden, and you have excellent people working there, and a former colleague of mine, John Scott, who has extensive knowledge in Scottish politics but also in farming. I think that's the type of people that really show you have very positive outcomes, and you're focused both on the political side of things, the scientific side of things, and for farmers and crofters. But I was interested when you said it's unusual for the focus to be on endemic diseases. Why is that unusual, and why do you do it?
Yeah, I think endemic diseases are extremely important to production in Scotland and throughout the world because they are the diseases that farmers live with and their livestock live with day in, day out. and often they're the ones that are very hard to really address. I'm not saying it's easy to address other types of disease, but there's a lot of focus, for example, in other research institutes in the UK on exotic disease, so disease that is coming into the country to form epidemics in the country. That's very important as well. But actually, for us to get to the levels of efficiency and welfare and health within our livestock to meet things like net zero targets, biodiversity targets and food security targets, focusing on endemic disease is very, very important.
And you're speaking about BVD and Jonies and such like?
Absolutely, yeah.
And this isn't meant to be a criticism, but therefore, how successful has that been? Because we still have a significant problem with them.
Well, I think things like the BVD campaign has actually been extremely successful. It's a real success for Scotland. Has really focused on BVD, on the eradication of that. We're going into one of the final stages of the BVD campaign, and that has really driven disease levels down hugely.
Unless we have closed herds, there's still going to be BVD coming into Scotland, so that's where I mean more in success.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you have to maintain surveillance and you have to rely on your neighbours and others to instigate their own eradication campaigns to allow that to be successful at a local scale. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Owens, can I move to you? I was looking at the Scottish Association of Marine Sciences, and you also have an offshoot, SAMS Enterprises.
That's correct, yes.
And you're involved in that as well?
I'm actually the chief executive of that as well, yes.
Excellent, because I noticed they look at, in particular, SAMS Enterprise specialises in providing scientific monitoring services to the renewable energy industry.
That's correct, yes.
The committee discussed in our private session, and it will become public, a response we've received from the Scottish Government about a misleading claim of Scotland's energy potential, renewable energy potential. Right. Yep. For example, Michael Matheson, the current Cabinet Secretary for Health in Scotland, formerly Transport and Net Zero, tweeted in August 2021 that Scotland had 60% of the UK's offshore wind capacity and 25% of Europe's wind resource.
Right.
Now, I think the latter figure has been confirmed to be completely accurate, and I think the former figure is actually closer to 8% than 60%. How difficult is it when government ministers, we will say government ministers, use statistics like that are proven to be inaccurate? And what role do you play in highlighting or correcting some of these figures if they are used repeatedly and erroneously?
The majority of the work, in fact, all of the work that we do, both in SAMS and in SAMS Enterprise, actually, is essentially competitively won. So in order to carry out the work in the first place, we would have to be able to prove that we were capable of answering the correct questions. And now, our particular institute is not involved in the wind generation or power generation itself. Our role is in the environmental consequences of that and the environmental impact that such wind structures might have on the environment. So we do not have any expertise in the physical side of how much power generation there might be possible.
And for example, those figures have been shown to be completely wrong. So saying Scotland had 60% of the UK's wind capacity, at the time that was tweeted in August 21, it was actually closer to 8%, and the 25% of Europe's wind resource. Now even the Scottish Government have had to accept that was completely wrong. Just in the generality of those figures being used, how difficult does it make it for you and others within the sector when wrong statistics are used repeatedly, and how important is it for the truth to come to the fore with these deliberations?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely vital that the truth and that such things have to be absolutely accurate, and that is our primary mission. As far as we can physically do this, we seek the absolute accurate results, irrespective of what they might be. So a good example of that would be that if we were commissioned to do a piece of work, and for either a commercial organisation or a government body, for instance, and actually the results that we produce were disliked by that, then that would make no difference, as we would publish them all the same. We can do the best that we can, and as long as we're accurate, we will absolutely publish them, irrespective of who our paymasters were. So accuracy is absolutely essential.
Thank you. And apologies again, I have to leave early, but I will look at the transcript of this meeting, and I'm sure the evidence will be fascinating going forward. So thank you all very much for that.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, witnesses, for being here today. Just quite a broad question for me in the first place. For each of you, where does your funding primarily come from in broad terms? And how adequate do you feel it is? I'm sure I can anticipate the answer to that. But how stable is it? Because that's clearly very important for the ongoing viability of your institutes. If I could start with you, Professor Nisbet.
So at the Mordun, our funding, our scientific research funding comes just less than 50% from Scottish Government. And the remainder is what we refer to as external funding. External funding, 20% of it comes from European Union, 25% from UKRI, about 15% from commercial sponsors, from private research contracts. The rest come either from competitive research contracts, or we actually have a model at the Mordun where we have two spin-out companies from the Mordun Foundation who feed GiftAid back into the Research Institute, which is very welcome. In terms of stability, of course, Scottish Government funding has been at a flat level for at least a decade. Which means that in real terms that's going down.
The announcement of 35 million cuts, has that had an impact on you as well for the FEHE sector?
We had cuts last year in the scientific budget. We don't know what's coming yet this year. So that leads to some instability. We also, and we may come to it later, but through UKRI funding, Hutton and Mordun don't receive 100% full economic costings. So they have to be found from elsewhere, and often they are found from, as I say, the GiftAid donations from our profits from our other companies. That has a level of instability in it as well, because there's a level of uncertainty as to what those profit levels might be.
And you mentioned EU funding. Is the return of Horizon, is that going to be of benefit to you? It'll
be a huge benefit to us. I think both Hutton and Mordun have done extremely well during the period since Brexit in terms of maintaining our relationships with our European partners and maintaining our funding levels. They certainly have gone down, and funding-wise, the return to Horizon Europe is fantastic news. So yes, we look forward to the opportunities on that.
It sounds like in terms of your spin-offs, that's one of the places where you actually have an opportunity to have control of your own destiny in some regards, and Horizon should present that same option.
To some extent. I think one of the spin-offs is a contract research organisation, so we're very much in the hands of what commercial companies want to put through that business.
Thank you very much. Given the mention of James Hutton, can I come to you next, Professor Roberts?
Yep. So our funding comes 60% roughly from Scottish Government, 25% from competitively won grants, so that's UKRI, EU, and charities, none of which actually pay full economic costing, so it's certainly an issue with UKRI, but with all of them. About 10%, so it's slightly less than Mordun, from our commercial arm, and then 5%, I hope I've got this right, from just various other situations like rental income or philanthropic sources. So for us, a very major issue is the lack of full economic costing for our competitively won grants. We don't get research excellence grant income, which the universities get, which provides their core underpinning funding. So the dual support model that UKRI run just doesn't really work for us. So we're forced to try and make up that shortfall by lots of other means, which include our commercial arm. Just to say that EU funding, we're delighted to be, absolutely delighted to be back in Horizon Europe. I think the Institute was the fourth most successful in our particular areas of expertise, so it's really important for us, but not just for money, but because science is international, and that really helps us spread the Scottish influence and understand and put our research in a wider context. So scientifically, it's really important.
And is it challenging having sort of a greater than 50%, 60% coming from one income source, in terms of if there is that flatlining, then how you're making it up?
Yes, there's a pressure obviously to diversify as much as we can. We only became eligible for UKRI in 2019. So prior to that, we weren't even eligible to compete for that source of funding. And it has become now of equal importance to us as EU funding. And it's very important in terms of the type of science that's funded through UKRI. So it's, I'm probably not explaining this very well, but it isn't always just how much money it is, it's the mix of...
I know that Alan Brown has
of
questions
types.
on UKRI, but just in terms of just a little bit of clarity, you became eligible in 2019. Is that the case for other research institutes in the UK, that they only became eligible at that point?
No, you each had to apply independently to become eligible, and that, at that point we were allowed to bid. Prior to that, we were not allowed to bid for it.
Because obviously it was mentioned, and I think it was maybe yourself, Professor Owens, in relation to that sort of Scottish Enlightenment and the uniqueness of the institutes here. If I can come on to yourself, is that one of the challenges around UKRI funding?
Yes, I mean, our split is not too dissimilar from my colleagues here. About 70% is competitively won funding. Unlike my colleagues, we get no money from the Scottish Government at all.
Okay.
If we do get any, then it's competitively bid for. Unlike my colleagues, we actually, because of our relationship with UHR, although as I mentioned, it's a complex one, we're not legally part of it, we actually do benefit from the REG funding. So we do get about £1 million a year. So about 10% of our money comes from that REG money, which is a great help. But and then about 15% or thereabouts is our commercial. Our commercial income.
For all that you're here representing the institutes, it's actually quite a different funding landscape
Very
for
much
all
so.
of you.
Yes, definitely.
Is there anything that would help in terms of, and I mean, increase in funding? We're always going to, more money would be great, but if there was one place where more funding would directly impact most on the work that you do, where would that be, Professor Owens?
Well, I think the ability to be able to do serious, valuable long-term studies. So, I mean, give you an example of sort of the absence of that. Around Scotland, I mean, there is really only one serious sea level rise measuring station. You know, that's just one. But in terms of toxic algal blooms, things like that, the real ability to be able to get a knowledge of how all of these things work, for instance, relies absolutely on long-term studies, and it's the absence of that. And when I tell you that a statistic which I have to get in before I leave, so I'll get it in, which I think this committee should be interested in if you don't know, and that is 60% of the UK's EEZ is Scottish. And that is because of that's the impact of the EEZ that's part of this from Scotland's marine waters. And so, I mean, the ability to be able to know what is going on in that huge area is absolutely fundamental in terms of readiness and preparedness for climate change. Arguments to say that there will be a lot of more, perhaps larger impacts in Scotland than perhaps other parts of the UK. Things like that, actually, I think, is the ability to be able to really focus on some of the long-term studies.
Definitely work that's becoming more critical. If I think about North East Fife, we've had real impacts from post-Storm Babette from sea surges.
Yes.
But actually, visibly, it's the coastline. But actually, speaking to the fishermen who fish out, they have lost creels. The stock has literally gone because of what's happened under the water that has been less visible. So it is very important. Professor Nisbet, what would help the Morden if there was one funding stream that would benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree very much that long-term funding is absolutely essential. I think from Mordon's perspective, funding in capital expenditure and infrastructure is, absolutely key to our success. It keeps us at the forefront of having the facilities to perform the unique work that we do. So at Morden, we have a high security unit where we can perform experiments with pathogens, viruses and bacteria that require very high levels of containment, and that's unique in Scotland. There are only 5 of them in the UK. And we really saw the value of that during the pandemic, for example, when it was under a huge amount of pressure. It was extremely hard worked for academic colleagues wanting to come to use it and ourselves using it. However, something like that, a facility like that, takes a lot of expenditure. It takes a lot of money to maintain it, but also to improve it. And we've been fortunate this year to receive some funding from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. to upgrade that facility, but the quantity of money that's required is much more than that. So for me, it's capital expenditure and infrastructure.
And Professor Roberts, to come to you, and this is my last question. I understand that the James Hutton has benefited from the T-Cities deal, but part of the challenge there is actually you get funding for capital projects, but not necessarily the accompanying revenue. Is that a challenge for you?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say that was one of my three. I have three.
Okay, we'll give me the other two then.
Yeah, so that funding has been absolutely amazingly important for the James Hutton Institute because we don't get capital funding from other sources. So that's been absolutely wonderful, but it is capital only. And if there is some way of getting some revenue funding to alongside that, then we would be able to just hit the ground running a little bit faster. It would just make sure that the impact that is going to have occurs even faster. So that would be one of my asks. I would also say this, going back to the full economic costing, if we could get 100% full economic costing from UKRI grants, that would make a massive difference. It would mean that we could carry on applying. At the moment, it's limiting our opportunity to get that sort of funding because we just are losing money when we gain it. And then I just also wanted to back up the long term. The best way to get an agile research ecosystem is to fund long term, and you could see that from the COVID situation. We were ready to respond. BIOS, who's also employed via the Hutton Institute, was able to respond and support the COVID response. It's a long time ago, but when Chernobyl happened, you had that long-term resources there that could actually see what the implications were of that fallout and how to manage that from a food system perspective. And when the Ukraine war happened, we were there. We know the sort of understanding of the infrastructure, the food system, that we could respond and support the Scottish Government in that context about how to respond. So it's having that capacity that is long-term funding is just a really good way of going.
So back to my initial question, which was adequacy, but stability is clearly very critical as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Alan Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Just to kind of pick up some of the funding issues that Wendy touched on, just before we come to that, I've already had some discussion about UK Government, Scottish Government's understanding of the role of the IROs. Just want to ask, does UKRI have a good understanding of the Scottish research landscape and the actual role devolution plays in that? Just start with yourself, Professor Roberts.
I mentioned earlier that I think UKRI funding is very important because it funds fundamental research, which is really important to the Institute, and it also has these cross-council calls. And the cross-council calls also tend to be on themes which are very aligned with our interests. So a recent one has been the Land Use for Net Zero call that UKRI have put out, and that focuses on soil health, on agricultural systems, on land use change, and these are issues which are very well aligned with the needs of research in Scotland. So in some sense, yes, in terms of the funding areas and the nature of funding that's provided, I guess the issue goes back to, again...
Does that come as a coincidence or an opportunity rather than a full understanding? I mean, their understanding of, the Scottish research landscape?
It's a good question. I think what I would say is quite a lot of our colleagues are on UKRI panels. We help shape the bids. So there's a degree of collaboration. The Land Use for Net Zero, I know, was very focused on the devolved administrations, and it was explicit about recognising that. So, and I would say that UKRI are very good at visiting the Institute. We have a good relationship with them. So it's not that there's a bad relationship there, but it just goes back to the funding issue again, I guess. I think sometimes they don't understand the extent to which institutes like ourselves can't get capital from other sources, and where therefore things like the Tay-Cities regional deal was really important to us. UKRI have some schemes which exclude the institute, the independent research organisations, from bidding for it, like the I'll have to get the name right, UK Research Partnership Investment Fund is only open to universities. It's not open to IROs. So it might be they don't quite understand the extent to which we're not eligible for certain types of funding, and as a result, you could argue there's a misunderstanding there of the landscape.
Yeah, and I mean, just up on that. So you said they're very good at engaging in terms of visits. So how come if they're very good at visiting and meeting with you and having dialogue, there's still that disconnect that they don't understand your funding requirements and, you know, the obstacles that are effectively put in your way?
I mean, well, I'll start and then I think it is just a very complicated landscape. They have their own institutes, which they do have a different funding relationship with. It's just that some of us too, are kind of like don't have parent research councils, which is where it becomes a little bit complicated. So it's just how diverse the landscape is, and that's where that mapping exercise would be really useful to just clarify exactly where everyone stands and who's eligible for what and so forth.
So Nisbet, you want to add to anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very clear explanation. I do think that UKRI are very good at engaging with us to understand what an IRO is. You know, we certainly have had visits from the Animal Health and Welfare Funders Forum, who have very high-level people from the scientific strategy side of things in UKRI who come to visit us to discuss what their scientific strategy is for funding in terms of funding areas and cross-council calls. However, those aren't the same people who are setting the budgets and saying, you know, okay, there is this funding shortfall, what do we do about it? So I think perhaps there's a disconnect there. That you know, the people who are speaking to us about scientific strategy aren't necessarily the right people to be speaking to about the financial and fiscal strategy.
Yes, I think for us we have an interesting little twist in that for a period of time, I mentioned that we were, you know, we go back to the 1880s, but for a period from perhaps about the 60s through to the 80s or so, we actually were formally effectively fully funded by what is now the Natural Environment Research Council, so one of the UKRI councils. So for a period of time, you know, we were a research council institute, and then have now reverted back. So our relationship with, if you like, a host research council is generally pretty good. What has now happened, however, is that, you know, we've evolved, and so where if there is any lack of clarity, is the research councils and others don't really realise, you know, how we might have evolved and what the complicated landscape now looks like. But I would say that I would certainly say that that's not a function of devolution in any way. It's just if you like, a child has gone off and evolved in a different way. So generally, we've got a pretty good relationship and understanding, I would say. But I think understanding could always be improved.
Thanks. And some of the background notes, I picked up that there's actually a UK Government Commission independent review into UKRI funding last year, and they noticed that they commented the 80%, 20% policy disadvantaged IROs. And previously in 2021, Sir John Kingman, the outgoing UKRI chair, also noted the difficulty with the bridging gap for IROs. So it seems to be a known issue, and clearly you've each highlighted 80-20 as an issue going forward for stability and weight. So is there any understanding why there seems to be there's been no movement yet by UKRI, you know, in terms of opening up 100% funding?
I don't know why that should be, to be honest.
No, I mean, I mean, this is an issue that's been going on for years, actually. So it isn't a recent thing at all, and it applies equally to us as well. That you know, if we were purely funded by, well, we'd be bankrupt if we were purely funded by UKRI grants. We could not survive at all on UKRI grants. It's not a new feature. Why it still exists, I don't know. I remember a very erudite piece given by a former minister, David Willett, actually has written extensively on this 80-20 funding and how it's stifling research. And to be honest, it's as relevant for the universities as it is for us.
Yeah. And if it's stifling research, UKRI are clearly not getting their desired outcomes in some areas as well, presumably.
Well, indeed.
Can I just quickly, just to finish off, just ask each of you in turn, if you're able to quantify just what that 80-20 does mean in the long run in terms of, you know, potential limiting capacity to make bids because you can't get the fund up to open, or if, you know, you can't get that access to 20% to make it a viable bid, and or what it does mean for financial long-term stability.
Yes, I'm not going to be able to quantify it, but I can give a narrative to it. It would mean that we wouldn't go for certain types of projects which in the longer run might undermine our translational pipeline, which is where we do different types of research all the way along a research pipeline, from very fundamental right through to industry-related, policy-related. So UKRI plays a very important role within that pipeline. And if we were to stop doing that, I think it would threaten our whole sort of approach to doing research. It would mean perhaps that you weren't getting the best people doing particular grants. If you're not getting everybody competing, you're not necessarily getting the best people doing research projects. And I guess the main thing is it would also send a signal. UKRI is a very well-respected funding source, and if we stop doing that, it might threaten the way that we're recognised more broadly within the research infrastructure.
Potential reputational issues, not accessing that.
Yes. Yeah.
Professor Nisbet, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I think UKRI grants are an extremely good way for particularly early career researchers to come into institutes like us, for us to have the external funding to do work that perhaps we wouldn't have done, but we have very good scientists who are able to write competitive grants to bring in new blood into the institute, to allow early career researchers to establish their careers in the IROs, and I think that's really the lifeblood of our type of institutes. We would be very reluctant to start to ask people not to write those grants on the basis of a financial decision, but it does affect the balance of what we are able to ask people to go for in terms of funding. You know, UKRI is 80-20. Some of the other funding councils are even worse than that, and so we have actively asked people not to submit particular grants to particular funders in a certain year because we couldn't afford to make up the full economic costing. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very similar situation to us. I mean, it's the most tragic thing to do, particularly to an early career scientist, is to say, actually, you know what, we can't afford for you to do that, because the UKRI and similar types of funding, I mean, it's the gold standard for the research, and so if you really want to create new assets and new knowledge, that's really where it's done. And so what we do, and you know, it creates behaviours and the type of organisation that you create in order to enable the institute to go for the UKRI money, because it is where you can get the blue skies research done. And so you do all sorts of things that you might not perhaps prefer to do in order to support the, as I say, the gold standard blue skies research, without which we would have nothing really.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just having a quick look at the board of UKRI, and I note that it's chaired by the distinguished Professor Ian Boyd, who's Professor at the University of St Andrews. So obviously there's Scottish representation on...
Oh, yes, indeed.
Just now. So I'm presuming that it's easily accessed and that you have ongoing conversations about your issues. Could you just give a sort of flavour about how these go? And like if you have, like, if this is an ongoing... I wouldn't say dispute, but concern you have about 80-20. Is it easy to make those representations to the board?
Shall I answer? Yes. I mean, there's certainly there is no hindrance to making our views known. But as I mentioned, this is something which has been going on for decades, actually. So you know why we haven't been able to get through, I don't know. It isn't unique to the current set of institutions.
Usually at this committee we go through the membership of august bodies such as UKRI,
right.
Find that there's no Scottish membership, but there is in this, which is great, and it's good it's been acknowledged and accepted.
Indeed, and I'm pleased to say Ian Boyd is a good colleague and friend of mine and a marine scientist, so I've had plenty of opportunity to communicate with him.
Well, thank you for that. Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry I was late joining this afternoon. I just want to look a bit at private sector or private investment. So we know that private investment is vital because it seeds innovation and new discoveries that transform our economy, builds new industries, increases productivity, enhances competitive global economy. So how much collaboration does your organisation undertake with the private sector, either financial or through shared resources? I'll go to Professor Roberts first.
I would say an increasing amount, and that is partly related to some of the things I've spoken about previously. In particular, really two good examples are the innovation hubs that we've recently started, the potato innovation, no, sorry, that's one we're hoping to start, the Barley Innovation, the International Barley Centre and the Advanced Plant Growth Centre. They're both innovation hubs which have been supported through the Tayside City Regional Deal. And they're very much about working with the private sector and trying to ensure that we're doing work that is needed and that has high levels of impact. And they're sort of managed to get together people across the whole, so the Barley Innovation Centre, for example, has got people from the whole barley industry, so people that don't usually talk to each other because they're competing, people at different stages in the barley chain, in the whiskey chain, all together around the table at the same time, discussing the issues that are important to that sector. And so that's helping stimulate a great deal more activity in relation to private links. We've also, a really good example there is we've won funding, 3.1 million for, again, this is UKRI funding, which is great, for 30 new PhD students. And each of those PhD students has an industrial sponsor. And they're putting money into the PhD programme. So that's just going to be, you know, has a seismic change on the amount of capacity and understanding in that particular field. So that's really positive, and it will help consolidate our links with the private sector. What I would say about private sector funding, though, is that it's very exciting. It can have really big impact. It's been very good for our scientists, actually, to be more exposed to the private sector. It's changed the way we've worked a bit. But it's very risky, and it's very short term, and it can suddenly stop. And so it's got downsides as well as upsides. And the best thing is to have that mix of public and private sector funding, as our innovation hubs are trying to achieve. So it's that mix that's
de-risking from the public sector. And
it's both de-risking each other a bit, actually, yes.
Thank you, Professor Niz.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned earlier about 15% of our funding comes directly from commercial partners. So I think it's one of the unique things about IROs that what we do is not really often about describing a problem, it's about finding solutions to a problem, and so that brings us very close to the private sector because they want the solutions that we're producing to be able to make them into commercial products, and very often that's our pipeline for a number of our projects, is to get them to a certain point and then we license them to partners. I think as well as the direct funding from commercial partners, of course, there are other mechanisms to leverage that funding. So industrial partnership awards through UKRI are very important to us. That's a mechanism by which a commercial partner can put 10% cash into a project that de-risks it for them. And often those are quite early stage projects. And then as we move along the pipeline, we think about Innovate UK funding and partnerships with commercial partners, and that's an area that we haven't really exploited. We haven't really been able to exploit very well in the livestock sector. Only 0.1% of our overall external funding actually comes from Innovate UK, which is very low. I would agree entirely that external funding is fantastic, and it's very often exciting. It's very often real cutting edge stuff. One of the downsides potentially of commercial funding is that independent research organisations really have a reputation as being honest brokers. So we don't represent drug companies, we don't recommend certain products, or we don't recommend any products, we give advice. But we may be at risk of losing that honest broker status if we're seen to be sponsored by a large pharmaceutical company, for example. That could be a reputational risk.
Thank you. And Professor Owens.
Yes, that's a very interesting point, the last one there, is that one of the things that we have to be very careful of is being seen perhaps to be in the pay of a particular sector, and that's something that we pay particular attention to. The way we think of our research in SAMS is very much on a continuum from blue skies at one end to really hard problem-solving research at the other. And so the commercial sponsors tend to be accumulate towards that that end, the applied end of our continuum. And there have been some very helpful schemes around over the years. So, for instance, the innovation centres that were funded by the Scottish Government have been extremely helpful, and we've built up a number of relationships with commercial companies there. And they sponsor students. They will often fully fund pieces of research, or 50% of it, and so on. So there's certainly in the marine science community that we work in, we're developing quite a community, I would say, of really helpful relationships with the commercial world. But we have to then, as we've just mentioned, have to be careful to be seen not to be in the pay of these organisations.
Because, you do a lot of marine sciences. We've got ocean-based, nature-based solutions to climate change.
Yes.
The potential is huge, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's a fascinating time in marine science at the moment. And there's a lot of attention being paid to, as you say, nature-based solutions. It's difficult to open a newspaper these days without seeing something around seaweed, for instance. Yeah. And I have to say, many of the facts that one reads, do not believe them. And certainly, if I may offer advice to such worthies, the whole notion of carbon trading with some of these seaweed things is on very, very shaky scientific ground. But you're right. There is a whole raft of organisations that are really building up here, and one of our roles, clearly, it's a part of our mission really, is to do valuable research, to be of value. So we generate the knowledge in the first place through the blue skies work, but then deploy it in valuable ways.
Just picking up on that, the government does have a role to play in incentivising the private sector investment. Turning to you first, Professor Owens, how does the government do it? I mean, when you talk about carbon credits, you just mentioned, and we need to encourage the private sector to invest in nature and climate change innovation and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We obviously need a regulatory facilitating environment to encourage that. Would you say that was the case, and do we need other things as well?
Ooh, gosh, that's a big question. No, that's a very big question. I'm not sure about the regulation. I mean, I think that a very specific example, for instance, something that we've been working on for quite some time, for instance, are developing the right sort of codes. So they're not necessarily sort of regulatory bodies as such, but they're recognised and established and have good basis in science. A sort of a code of practice, if you like, that is then peer reviewed. So it's the same. It's the same sort of process that one might go through in publishing a paper in an academic journal. Though, so you do your research, you write this thing up, and it's peer reviewed and very robustly and so on. But one could, at the outcome, rather than being an academic paper, you would have a code of conduct, for instance, if you like, or a code of application, let's say, in carbon sequestration in seaweed, as an example. So I don't think anybody would really favour the notion of creating establishments and regulation in that sense, but certainly something that has been rigorously reviewed scientifically is what's really needed.
You should have a look at our, I chair the APPG for the ocean, and we're doing a current inquiry on the future of ocean-based technologies, which is quite interesting.
Oh, interesting. I would definitely be interested in that. I have, in fact, toyed with the idea of creating a parallel committee, actually, in the Scottish Parliament. But,
oh, really?
Yes, I have.
There you go. Brilliant.
Right.
Make sure Sally Ann's invited along for advice.
We will exchange emails, if I may. Thank you.
Professor Nisbet, about government incentivisation for the private sector is obviously, how would that happen for your organisation?
Yeah, well, I'd actually give a very good example of how that has happened in the past. So there was a scheme called the Genomia scheme, and the Genomia scheme was funded partly by public sector research establishment funding, but also co-funded by the European Regional Development Fund. And that was a funding scheme specifically for IROs, and it allowed the translation of scientific ideas into commercial products and really bridged that sort of valley of death sort of area between the two. It was a scheme that worked very, very well. There was funding at various different levels. As I say, I think it ran for at least a decade. It's now being wound up. But actually, that was an extremely good way to engage scientists and industry together is through that funding scheme and saying we can have individual projects up to £250,000, to actually bring your idea to commercial fruition and bring in the commercial partners at the same time. So actually that was a very, very good way of doing it.
Thank you. Professor Roberts.
I don't have much to add except the Genomia scheme was good. Innovate UK has been mentioned, which is a very, very good scheme, I think, for getting that private sector investment involved. And the last thing I was just going to mention was another plug for if we want high integrity carbon markets, we have to have the science that underpins it. Yes. And so it's again the long-term value of science. And
can't do it without a science base.
Correct.
No.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. David Duckett.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for me also for not being here at the start of the session. I was, just to give you a bit of background actually, I was in Ministry of Defence questions and I was asking a very similar question to what I'm about to ask, because defence obviously being reserved to this Parliament, the question was specifically about the skills that we need to feed into that industry. And I found myself asking this question quite a lot lately, whether it's the energy sector or space. It came up in one of our other inquiries on space. And it goes back a little bit to Alan Brown's questions about UKRI. UKRI is a UK-wide initiative, body, whatever you want to describe it. But there does seem to be this interesting breakdown when it crosses the border. And I'm wondering how much of that is potentially, and I'm not having a political pop here, although I might be tempted to think that I am, but how much of that is possibly because of education and skills and universities, etc., being devolved, not just in Scotland but Wales as well, and Northern Ireland, how much of that creates a gap, not just from a point of view of the devolved administration, but also from the UK government who says, okay, fine, that's devolved, we don't have to fill that space. Are you aware of such a gap, or ultimately, is there anything we can do or we can recommend to the UK government to help resolve that? Anyone?
I'll make a start if I may. I have to say, personally, I cannot say that I've experienced any of that gap. Certainly in my time in Scotland, which is relatively recent. 8 years I've been in the current role, so I can honestly say I've not experienced anything of that nature.
So I was wondering, is your question about a skills gap because of the differences in
What about the approach, a policy approach? Not so much a gap in the skills, but happy to talk about that as well. But it's more about when we have something that's supposed to be covered UK-wide, but there's a devolved aspect to it. Sometimes we see a gap forming between the Scottish Government and the UK Government. Not for political reasons, it's just because there's maybe a misunderstanding of who's doing what. And so a gap appears. I'm just wondering if that's something you've come across in scientific research in Scotland.
I don't think it's something that I've really experienced. I would say that the nature of what we do for Scottish Government in terms of our scientific research is very strategic, and we feed into the policy or policy questions that policy colleagues have at Scottish Government. So that may make the type of research that we do slightly different to what we would do, for example, through UKRI funding. But I'm not sure that that's because of any devolved question. It's just about different stakeholders.
And I was just going to make the point that there will be IROs in other parts of the UK that are in the same position as we are. So that in that sense, it isn't a devolved issue. It's more of a just incredibly complicated legacy historical issue that hasn't been corrected.
And just on the question that was touched upon was getting educated people into research in Scotland. Is there anything we should be looking at there in terms of helping promote that, or helping encouraging people to get into more scientific research type roles?
I mean,
it's quite answer's going to be yes.
Yeah, yes. I mean, we in our particular issue, we generally speaking don't have any difficulty in recruiting scientists, with the exception that sometimes our remote location is a hindrance in terms of the reputation that we have and the ability to carry out the science and so on. I mean, we have not experienced that as an issue. It's the remote location of us actually where we fall down. That's if we have a recruitment issue, that is where it's at, frankly.
I'd just like, I know this was brought up in the previous session actually, but there is an issue about the cost of visas for staff and students, I think, and that is an issue in terms of recruitment that we've faced at the James Hutton Institute, for sure. That is a disincentive that is making it harder to recruit in certain areas of science. In certain areas of science, we can recruit within the UK quite easily. In others, we do need to go internationally, and that's a barrier.
Similar answer from yourself?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously, the post-Brexit issues with recruiting have been very clear to us, and actually the loss of staff and then trying to recruit also from Europe have been very clear. I think in terms of our homegrown talent, it's still very strong. I think STEM is still really important for students in Scotland, so I think homegrown talent is not so much of an issue, but I think to form good cohesive teams, we all rely on international collaborations and being able to attract the best international scientists, and post-Brexit that has been difficult.
Does Horizon help with that at all?
I hope it will.
No more questions?
Just finally, just for me, one thing we've not touched on is other international collaborations. I've heard a little bit about Horizon, and Mr. Duke has brought it up again. Is there anything else that you do in terms of international bodies that you work with? Obviously, I'm familiar more with the James Hutton Institute's work and some of the international workers, the workforce that is there from all over the world. And I mean, could you just give us a sense of some of the other international work and collaborations that you have? I know more about Hutton, so I'll come to you, Professor Nesbitt, with that one.
Yeah, well, certainly within the livestock sector, a lot of what we do, as I touched on earlier, is about endemic disease. And so the endemic diseases in the livestock sector, in sheep and cattle, in temperate areas of the world are very similar. Recently we've had great success in leveraging funding from Meat and Livestock Australia, which is a red meat levy board in Australia, and we've used Scottish Government research and funding to leverage that funding from Meat and Livestock Australia. So we work with Australian colleagues, we work with colleagues from New Zealand, but we also find that a lot of the technologies that we use, so a lot of our outputs are vaccines and diagnostics and animal disease control programs, and a lot of the practicalities of how you deliver those are actually very common to a number of different diseases. So we also have very strong links to sub-Saharan Africa and the control of infectious disease in cattle, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, we've got quite an international footprint.
Yes, indeed. I think although we do a lot of work that's relevant for our local area and Scotland generally, we have a massive international footprint all over the world. In terms of staff and students, I think the last count has something like 24 different nationalities, which in a little place like Oban, it makes quite a difference. But also internationally, there's quite a great deal of interest, for instance, in the Arctic, and we have quite an influence, I think, in being able to help certainly the Scottish Government and the UK governments in interactions with the Arctic. So I think we like to add that to the asset that we feel we are.
Just lastly, Professor Roberts, I think you add?
So international students, international staff, international projects, and I guess that's where we like to think we really are making an impact. I think in our evidence we talked about 50% of black currants in the whole world come from James Hutton Institute, but we're doing projects which is making a difference. We do work in relation to climate change, which in certain parts of the world is just going to be absolutely devastating. So we have to come up with crops which are more resilient to the sort of conditions that we're going to face in the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you all ever so much. I knew this would be a fascinating and riveting and informative session, and it's proven to be so. What we're going to do is try and change around seamlessly without suspending the session, so we'll allow your colleagues to come forward as quietly and inauspiciously as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There at the end.
We've got even more professors. It's, I think, a total of 7 professors we've had on this committee today. I don't know if there's a collective term for professors, but
University, higher education institution.
there you go. I knew there would be some good answer and response to that. But thank you ever so much for helping us out in this session. Obviously, the universities provide probably the majority and bulk of the research that happens right across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and we're interested to hear from you just some of the issues, difficulties, challenges and opportunities that we have. But first of all, we'll let you all introduce yourselves, where you're from. If you want to share anything that you're bursting to tell us, please feel free to do so. We'll start with you, Professor Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tom Brown. I'm Vice Principal for Research, Collections and Innovation at the University of St Andrews. By background, I'm a physicist and I've been doing science in Scotland for the last 25 years.
Professor Gibson.
Thank you. I'm Lisanne Gibson. I'm the Vice Principal for Research at Dundee University and 2.5 months into my new role.
Wow.
And indeed 2.5 months into being new to Scotland. So I have the contrast of coming from England to Scotland and have some reflections on the differences that I've observed in the landscape. I'm a social scientist by background.
Professor Pearce.
Hello, my name's Chris Pearce and I'm the Vice Principal for Research and Knowledge Exchange at the University of Glasgow, where I'm also a Professor in our James Watt School of Engineering.
Professor Graham.
Hello, my name's Kim Graham. I'm the Provost at the University of Edinburgh. It's a role I've held now for 18 months, and prior to that I was the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Enterprise at Cardiff University. And also, just to highlight, I'm also a board member for the Medical Research Council for UKRI, but I'm here in my capacity as the Provost of the University of Edinburgh.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for those very concise introductions. Just to get things started, I know you were paying great attention to the previous session where we were hearing evidence from the independent research organisations. I'm just wondering how you view the collaboration between the two sectors, whether you feel this works seamlessly. And perhaps just tell us a little bit about, through your own experience, about where you think the real opportunities and challenges we have in research, and particularly in the university section, obviously, given that you're from that. We'll start with you, Professor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. And it was very interesting to sit here and listen to the independent research organisations. I would say we work in a pretty seamless way, actually, across Scotland. One of the great benefits of Scotland is the size and scale by which we can work collaboratively easily across institutions. So, for example, with James Hutton, we have joint staff employed with James Hutton. We have PhD students shared with them. We are working with James Hutton using some of their infrastructure, particularly in high-performance computing, to support our own research at St Andrews. So we've managed to do that in a way which is very low bureaucracy, and really is a meeting of friends united around common academic topics of interest.
And is that your experience, Professor Gibson? Your short time that you've been with us?
Yes, indeed. And I haven't made it to the James Hutton Institute yet, but it's certainly on my list. So we also work very closely with the James Hutton Institute, and we have academics co-located, we have shared PhD studentships, we have shared facilities, and as my colleague at the James Hutton Institute commented, you'd be hard-pressed to go to the James Hutton Institute and see the distinction between University of Dundee employees and James Hutton Institute employees. So very close working relationship, which is historic has been the case for many years.
And to you, Professor, feel free to answer the first questions, but I'm also interested just to get your view about whether the UK government's research strategies and policy demonstrate a good understanding of the Scottish research landscape.
Okay, well, I'll agree with my colleagues on the first question. I think Scotland is a highly collaborative environment, and we collaborate across institutions and institutes fairly seamlessly. On the second kind of more substantial question, I would say yes. I think the strong research impact and innovation agendas that are prevalent in the UK government strategies that balanced, I think, quite well against support for curiosity and discovery-driven research certainly play to Scotland's strengths. And I think probably the most significant UK government policy that I can point to is the Science and Technology Framework that was published following the formation of the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And I think this serves as a kind of quite a useful mechanism to kind of demonstrate the point about that understanding. That framework highlights 5 critical technologies: quantum, semiconductors, AI, engineering biology, and future telecoms. And I think all of these are areas that are extremely important to Scotland and areas where Scottish universities have genuine excellence. If I could just give you a couple of examples of that. So if I take, for example, quantum technologies, Scotland, and particularly Glasgow, has one of the highest concentrations of quantum-related research in the UK. The University of Glasgow leads one of the 4 national quantum technology hubs, and we lead one of those. We're involved in all 4. We lead one of them, the Quantum Imaging Hub. And then the second of those critical technology areas I mentioned was semiconductors, and again, semiconductors is an area where Scotland has an enormous academic strength, has a strong industry base, and we have world-class facilities and infrastructure. So I think that science and technology framework does reflect quite strongly the strengths in Scotland as well.
I want to come back to what we do, particularly in Scotland. We've never had a university provost, I believe, in our committee. So I just want to get Professor Graham's views just about her observations about how collaboration, how people work together, how partnerships are there. And is there anything that in your time in post that you've observed that maybe we need to work on a little bit more in terms of some of the collaborative work?
So my colleagues have commented on the strength of the partnerships across different parts of the innovation and research ecosystem within Scotland, and I do think that works well. We heard from the Morden Institute about the collaborations, for example, with the Roslin Institute and our vet school and the University of Edinburgh. So I share those views, and I also feel that it's that diversity of kind of organisations that can add a really rich environment. Following up from Chris's points, I also agree that there's relatively good alignment currently between UK government and Scottish government strategies. Chris has talked about the UK Science Technology Framework and its focus on 5 underpinning technologies. Of course, in the Scottish Government new National Innovation Strategy, we see similar areas which align to that. And I think, augmenting what Chris has said, what we've also seen in Scotland is really good partnership between Scottish and UK government in investment in key areas of research and innovation, such as through our city deals. For example, in Edinburgh, our 300 million data-driven innovation programme is aligned to both the goals of the UK Science and Technology Framework as well as the Scottish Government National Innovation Strategy, and is really helping drive inward investment from industry as well as support for new technology startups and companies. So I think what this shows is what governments can achieve when they cooperate and work together and find shared areas of interest and can invest and support the delivery of those accordingly.
Thank you, and it's always good to hear of good collaboration working, particularly between the government. That's music to our ears in the Scottish Affairs Committee. But Professor Pearce has mentioned some of the particular excellence we have in Scotland. I think it was quantum technologies and science and technology, and of course biosciences, and there's a number of things that we could list, which I hope that you guys might help me out with some of the list here. I mean, what is it that we do which is particular and distinct in Scotland. We were in the States recently, and Scottish research from the universities is something that is acknowledged as being world class. So what makes it that, and is it a reputation that is well deserved? And we'll start with you, Professor Brown.
So what makes it that is, I think it's important to realise that every single institution at this table is competing on a world scale with the research that we're undertaking. None of us are interested in doing research which is parochial, concerned only with Scotland or concerned with the UK. What we want to do is we want to do the best that we can within that world context. And that is the context within which we are all competing for staff, competing for resources and so on. So in order to answer your question, what Scotland does is single out or has areas which are particularly strong. So for example, an area which connects the two groups you've talked today is in marine science. You see very great strengths with ourselves from the Sea Mammal Research Unit, which is probably one of the world's leading units on understanding sea mammals, which of course then has wider knock-on effects for thinking about offshore power at the moment, but also, for example, in garnering industrial funding, where we fund a significant fraction of that work through funding which comes via the navies of the world to understand the impacts of sonar on marine creatures. So there are enormous areas where Scotland can pin that world leading, and as well as the science that you're talking about today, I think it's important to recognise the breadth of the Scottish sector and the fact we also deliver world leading research across the social sciences and the arts and humanities as well.
So thank you. And of course, Professor Gibson, those life sciences which I referenced, of course, is a big feature of offering from Dundee University's research. I mean, what makes this, why have we developed that type of space for ourselves within that particular discipline? And what do we need to do more in order to try and make it sure it remains world class?
I think another dimension of policy joined up between England and Scotland is the focus on the regional, and both of the levelling up agenda in England and the various funding mechanisms to fund that also is segueing with the Scottish Government's focus on regional strength. And when you look at biosciences in Dundee, you see what's happened as a result of over 20 years of investment and strategic investment in a particular area of scientific strength, which then results in the kind of incredible skill concentration that you have in that area in Dundee. And then critically, the importance of that absolutely world-class research, but then the importance of that for the region of Dundee and Tayside as well. And I think that in Scotland, you have certainly Scotland as a region, but then regions within Scotland, you have the importance of that coming together of world-class science, which is commercialisable, and then the effect of that on regions which, need that kind of economic investment. And that's what you've got, certainly, in Dundee and Tayside.
You've irked the attention of my colleague, Mr. Duckett.
Well, yes, I think, thanks panel for coming in today. It strikes me there's an empty seat at the end of the table there and you've got nobody from Aberdeen. But I don't know if they were invited or not, but I myself am a graduate of Robert Gordon University, so that's why I'm maybe feeling a little bit parochial. But what you were just saying there, Professor Gibson, about that combination of global versus local, it just made me realise that in Aberdeen, of course, they've historically had the oil and gas industry. Even before that, we've had a burgeoning food and drink sector for centuries before that. And it really strikes home that localisation, but could potentially have. Well, I guess my question is, am I reading you correctly that that's the connection? You take local knowledge that can be commercialised locally, such as in Aberdeen for the energy sector, but you make it more global and you make it basically exportable to the rest of the world, or the rest of the world looking in can see that Aberdeen's the place to go for energy sector research, Dundee for biosciences. Other universities are available, but is that what you're...
And that's absolutely what we would wish to happen, and that's fundamental to government strategy, which focuses on region. For Dundee, we say we build them and then they leave, because Dundee at the moment doesn't have the infrastructure. I know that this is going probably to questions that are later on in the session, but you know, what we do have is the hardest thing to have, which is the expertise. But what we don't have, because it's a small city, is the infrastructure. And so, you know, something like Accenture, the £2 million spin out that we spun out in 2021, 80% of that is now in Cambridge, because it couldn't stay in the Tay region. So we can get later on to, you know, how might government help with that commercialisation of university research, but also critically that commercialisation of university research is important because we need to take our world-class research, you know, to the public and make it usable. But it's also important because of the links between our universities and the regions within which they sit as civic anchor institutions.
Either from a UK government, probably more from a UK government point of view, with a levelling up agenda, does that actually create a hindrance if it looks specifically region by region, and you lose that assumption that maybe different universities from different parts of the country actually collaborate on something, and so assigning levelling up support, for example, in that one region, then has to be split somehow?
Research and innovation funding is an ecology. Right. So, I mean, if you look at, I was just, because you asked the question before, so I was just looking at the spread of our research funding, which is, you know, very various actually, which is a good thing. So we're not all focused on just one pot of funding, we're very various. And in that variety of funding from international commercial, UK commercial, UKRI, EU, charity, etc., Scottish funding count, Reg funding, in that diversity that allows the different scales and types of research from really full blue sky research to research which is very applied, and that cradle to grave approach to research, which, you know, enables innovation. So that retaining that ecology, which is both in terms of types of research funding, but also in terms of scale, so regional focused funding, but also funding that allows Scottish universities to work together and to benefit from that characteristic, which we do work together, more certainly than I saw with English universities in England.
Okay, I know Professor Brown was, but I didn't get to Professor Pearce and Graham about the general question about, you know, like the why we do this so well in Scotland, what we have, how do we retain it as world class, and how we need to support and resource it properly. So we'll maybe come to both of you first before moving on, and maybe get Professor Brown in.
Yeah, I mean, I can reiterate the points that I've already made. I mean, I think Scottish universities are doing it all. We have a very strong civic role. We see ourselves as civic anchor institutions. We do broad-based, fundamental, discovery-driven research, and to repeat Professor Brown's point, it's broad-based. It's from the science and technology on the one hand to the arts and humanities on the other. We are one of the most collaborative research nations in the world. So we're working internationally as well as having that local footprint as well. And on top of that, we are then translating that fundamental research into practice.
Professor Graham, anything to add to that?
Well, I agree with all those points. And I mean, just to give an example of the international point, I mean, we have a very significant regional agenda that we're delivering, but Edinburgh also collaborates with over 250 institutions worldwide and is part of 8 very broad university alliances, which really allow us to think about how we can collaborate and work with talent across the globe, as well as how that helps enhance what we do regionally to support other organisations within the region and within Scotland. And I thought the other thing that might be useful to say is we've talked a lot about the impact of what we believe Scottish universities is delivering. I mean, that's fully evidenced through our submissions to the REF 2021 impact, where a recent analysis showed that almost 50% of the impact case studies were rated as 4-star and outstanding, and they went from local to global, and analyses which confirmed that for every £1 spent in Scottish universities, we deliver £8 back. So those are really clear statistics that help us understand how Scottish universities are vital to the economy of Scotland, as well as how we work globally to help support and enable that.
We're going to come on to the REF directly, but I think Professor Brown was one.
I just wanted to come back to tie up just a couple of things that were said there, to come back to your point. It's not externals coming in to collaborate with an individual university. It is sometimes the power of the group of universities in Scotland. Right. A great example is the quantum technologies that Chris talked about earlier, where we now have pan-Scottish organisations which tie up basically the major players in Scottish universities, united around common research aims, collaborating with one another, competing academically, sure, that's what we do, we're universities, but uniting together to really deliver the best for Scotland. And the other important thing about the ecosystem is that we provide the ecosystem all the way from basic training right through to the sorts of international scale companies which can really use the technologies which are being developed by universities and within universities and apply them out into the wider world as well.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks all for being here today. Yeah, it's my questions that are going to come on to talk about research excellence framework, and it's been really striking to hear, particularly from Professor Gibson having come up from England, to hear that evidence of really strong collaboration between the universities in Scotland. But we've already heard evidence in relation to the REF at our last session that potentially it's a siloed approach that reflects very well how research was done decades ago, but does not reflect very well how research is done today, especially in Scotland, which potentially puts it at a disadvantage. So I suppose my question is those interdisciplinary elements, how effective is the REF a tool for evaluating research undertaken by universities in Scotland? And Professor Graham, if I can come to you first, please.
Thank you very much. So I have a positive view of the REF. I think it's really important in the context of us evidencing both Scottish and UK quality and impact of our research to have an assessment approach to that. And I think the REF is a mechanism, you can decide whether you think it's the right one or not, in order to evidence our contributions both locally but also globally. It also allows us to identify areas of excellence and evidence of how we collaborate across the UK, within Scotland and across the UK. And I mentioned already the evidence of Scotland's impact by the fact that almost half of our impact cases, which was half of 746, were 4-star and considered outstanding. I do think there are challenges around REF, not least the burden of assessment, both within institutions to submit to the assessment, as well as in terms of the assessment that's required in order to evidence those outcomes. The REF is on a journey it's always on a journey, I think, actually, in developing its approach in a way which allows us to both measure the way in which research and innovation is changing across our organisations and other contributors to research and innovation. And two ways it's done that is, one, to think about how you measure and assess interdisciplinary research, which it improved last time, and as well now thinking about not just what we do in terms of research, but how we deliver it.
Thank you very much to hear that different approach. And Professor Pearce, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I would also be positive, actually, about the REF. I think it has developed into a pretty effective framework for assessing both quality and impact of academic research in the UK, and I think it's an important part of our research and innovation system. And I think ultimately what that has done is underpinned confidence in how fairly significant amounts of public funding is then dispersed to universities. It's not perfect. There is an administrative overhead. It is largely a disciplinary-based, disciplinary-focused assessment exercise. So I do accept that the assessment of interdisciplinarity is a challenge for REF to address, but I don't think it's flawed completely because
of that. So it's not putting
work in progress
potentially at a disadvantage. And I suppose that's why it's obviously reassessed, or the new REF does that, which should be taking into account how research is moving.
So I certainly don't think that the REF framework puts Scotland at disadvantage to the rest of the UK.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Thank you. Professor Gibson.
Yes, I agree. I mean, the REF is generally agreed to be a world-class research assessment exercise. as my colleagues have said, it provides confidence in the expenditure on research. The challenge that is specific to Scotland is the finance that follows REF. We were talking before about the UKRI 80% funding of research, and the general underpinning philosophy of the reason for doing that was because the 20% was made up by quality-related funding which came from REF. But of course in Scotland we don't get that percentage of funding, and so that does put Scottish institutions at a very significant disadvantage. I think the other point, I'm sure it's already been made for you, but I'll make it again anyway, is in relation to the research culture changes that are proposed for the new REF, which broadly, of course, anybody would support. What's not to like? But I think it is safe to say that at least, I can speak only from a University of Dundee perspective, that we are worried about the speed of the change, that we're looking at an audit deadline of late 2027 and we don't know what's going to be measured yet. And the other, I think, very distinct concern in the sector, and certainly at the University of Dundee, is the significant amounts of extra funding that are going to English universities for pump priming different kinds of elements around research culture, which are not available to Scottish institutions. And we're concerned that this will be another thing that will put us at a disadvantage in terms of REF.
So that's UK government decisions?
No, that's a Research England.
Okay.
So Research England
so it would be over to the Scottish Funding Council to be looking to do something similar?
Scottish Funding Council could choose to do something similar, but of course it's got a much lower baseline with which to do it from.
Sorry, Professor Pearce.
No, I was just going to clarify that point. So.
Yeah. So that was my next question, was around the proposals for REF 28, because we have heard, or we have had written evidence that suggests that there are some concerns in the sector. And as you pointed out, Professor Gibson, speed is one. But the other one was, and it strikes me, given that I have heard, the robustness of REF being cited here as a strength, that potentially that the assessment for 28 is less focused. Professor Brown, I haven't heard from you yet. Would you share those views, or what's the university's thoughts?
So this clearly is a big topic currently, and it's a big topic which is under debate across the whole of the sector currently. So there's a variety of opinions that are sat there. So I think Professor Gibson's covered the research culture aspects pretty well, and where Scotland sees a relative disadvantage compared to what's happening south of the border. I think the other area where there has been some concern raised, which is that if you look at the overall plan as put out in the consultation document, research outputs now become worth less than 50% of the overall total of REF. Now that's caused some uncertainty within the sector. I think, speaking from an institutional perspective, I think we would be happy to see that move to the sort of 50% level, and I think that's what we will be saying when we go in to respond to the particular consultation. So I think what we're seeing with REF is we are seeing changes which are offer some fundamental changes to how REF is working. There are other complexities around what's called decoupling of outputs from individuals as well, which removes the minimum number of outputs, papers, books required from a researcher. And that's raised some concerns around, for example, EDI aspects of how you manage staff and how you think about that management. I think it's difficult for us to answer fully at this stage because the jury is still out on this at the moment, and the sector itself is discussing what the appropriate point to come to is on this. I think we will see some change on that over the course of the next few weeks and months as we go forwards.
I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds like it's that little bit of the speed aspect is meaning that the sort of justification or reasoning behind some of the changes haven't potentially been properly engaged with the sector.
My guess is we see this every REF in the cycle, actually, where we see reports published. I think in certain aspects in culture it is moving a bit quicker than it has in the past, and that's under discussion at the moment, and we'll see where that lands over the course of the next few months. I just want to come back to your first question about interdisciplinarity. REF itself recognises this issue of interdisciplinarity, and there's significant discussion within that REF setup around how interdisciplinarity will be covered and how it should be covered. Do I see it as a stifling block to interdisciplinarity? No, but I think high quality research is high quality research and can be recognised through the assessment procedure. Maybe we could do a bit better, but...
Yeah, and I suppose because the Scottish Funding Council is then, you know, distributing the block grant, you would think a Scottish body would recognise the particular strengths of the sector that you've all talked about. Professor Pearce, I think you wanted to come in.
I was only actually just going to reinforce the point. I think it's the fact that we are fast approaching 2024 for an assessment that is going to go between 2021 and 2027, and we don't yet fully understand the rules of the game. And I think that's and they're still being worked out as we go.
And clearly, clearly following on from the first session, funding is critical to the work that you do, and some certainty and stability of that funding is vital too. Sorry, I talked over you. No, that's fine. My final question was just around, and I think you've answered it, around the Scottish Funding Council using the results of the REF, and I think what I'm hearing is the panel wouldn't be convinced that a different model for determining that funding would be appropriate. But I just wanted to ask a sort of factual question. I've got here that the Scottish Funding Council includes consideration of UKRI research funding won by each institution to reflect the role that the funding has in supporting institutions to leverage research project funding. Do UKRI do that in reverse? Would they look at that in terms of what the REF funding given to a university or institution would be?
So it varies scheme by scheme, but normally we would apply for a sum of money from UKRI, and effectively that sum of money, 20% is taken off that, which covers that QR element that you're talking about there, which is expected to be covered through REG in Scotland.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for that clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alan Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. In the first session, in terms of UKRI, we heard some frustrations from the IROs in terms of the 80-20 funding model, but in terms of from universities sector perspective, is there any changes that you believe should be made within UKRI in terms of the processes to ensure it better understands research requirements in Scotland and also reflects the Scottish funding priorities? I would just start with yourself, Professor Brown.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's, by and large, as the RIO said earlier, the dialogue with UKRI is pretty good at an institutional level. I think there are areas where it could improve. So, for example, EPSRC, which is one of the larger councils, which makes up UKRI, actually has staff based in Scotland to talk to Scottish universities. It would be good to see that model adopted, frankly, across UKRI with an office in Scotland so they could understand that. That's a relatively minor concern. I think at the macro level, they're pretty good. Now, what I would say is, you talked about Ian Boyd being chair of UKRI earlier. He's a St Andrews member of staff. We have the interim executive chair from EPSRC is a Glasgow University researcher. The executive chair of AHRC is another St Andrews University researcher currently. Now, what I would stress is all three of these individuals are acting for the good of those institutions. They're not acting for the good of Scottish universities in that role. That being said, clearly there is knowledge of what's happening within the Scottish sector through that and other routes.
Sorry, Alan, just because that's a really helpful contribution. You're saying that they represent their own individual institutions and don't...
No, they represent the council that they are managing at that stage, and we would expect nothing other than that representation. They're not there to represent St Andrews. They're not there to represent Scotland.
They represent all of
the good of UKRI, or no, they're there to represent the good of UK interests.
UK.
Those roles. Yeah.
Like, there's not an expectation that they would sort of like take up a case or an issue.
Absolutely not.
Scottish research.
Absolutely not.
Clarifies it. Sorry, Alan.
Okay, Professor Brown, I mean, you're saying dialogue's good, although you did give an example when the council's got some staff based in Scotland, but is there actually any changes in processes you think are required, UKRI processes, to better reflect funding priorities in Scotland, or are you content there's no changes required?
Well, the issue that we have here, of course, is that research and innovation are both a relatively complex space between reserved matters and devolved. And so, for example, Scotland has its own innovation strategy, which was mentioned earlier, and so we all as institutions are aligning alongside the Scottish Government's innovation strategy. It would be interesting to see sometimes a little bit more alignment or understanding from some of the UKRI institutions around how things happen in the devolved nations which which may be slightly different or different to what's happening south of the border. And again, I think that can be relatively easily fixed. So
it can be easily fixed. What's the barrier to get it fixed then, if there's good dialogue?
What's the barrier to getting it fixed? Processes, time, and I think we have begun to have those dialogues through, for example, University of Scotland convening meetings between all of the members of this group and the wider community of Vice Principals for Research with the UKRI Executive Chairs. That happened in November last year, I think. So, so I think there's no shortage of mechanisms to see that change begin to happen.
Yeah, Professor Gibson, you want to add? Obviously, you've already discussed you've experienced both sides of the border, but just, in your current role, is there any changes in UKRI processes you think would be beneficial from a Scottish perspective and from understanding that landscape?
I think from a regional perspective, I think more funding that facilitates regional working. I mean, obviously that's going to benefit English regions as well, but more of that kind of funding I think would be particularly beneficial to Scotland, given smaller number of institutions, and given things like so Scotland at the moment has a worrying decline in the income it gets from UKRI. So I think there is, is that because we're getting less QR funding, and so the competitiveness of Scotland in the UKRI funding landscape is declining because of the lack of QR? I don't know. But certainly funding which will enable us to be more than the sum of our parts would be very welcome. I think the other thing that I do want to say, though, about UKRI, which I think is of great concern for Scotland, but also for England, and that's the decline in PhD funding. And it's a particular concern for Scotland because of the pipeline of talent. But we're looking at a 41% decline in UKRI-funded British PhD students since 2018-19 to 22-23. So that's a really significant drop-off, and that's our skills pipeline. So in terms of UKRI, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, what's the background for that almost halving then of funding for PhD students? What's the rationale behind that decision?
What's the rationale?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe some of my colleagues do.
Yeah. Professor Pearce, anything you want to add?
Well, if I could go back to the broader question around UKRI. Scotland, with 8% of the UK population, we attract 13% of UKRI funding. So on competitive UKRI funding, we actually do very well, and that's a credit to the universities in Scotland. Professor Gibson's correct. We are seeing a gradual decline in that over the last 10 years, and I think that is something that we need to keep an eye on and try to understand that. But I think we can't look at UKRI in isolation. We have to look at the whole funding ecosystem if we're to try to understand those trends. And I would also just say, I think that UKRI is actually still a relatively new, but also very large, complex organisation. And it's made up of several different research councils. And those research councils fund different types of research and have different modes of operation. So it's actually quite difficult often to look at UKRI as a whole. And sometimes we have to look at the constitutive parts. There are problems, obviously, but I think they are the same problems that you'll find with funding agencies across the world. I would say there are been some positive changes, and that's particularly around, as Professor Brown said, we're seeing some more regional engagement. We have pretty good access to the research council, so I think is good. And I think what we're seeing is an increase in what could only be described as place-based funding. Now, that doesn't just support Scotland, it supports all parts of the UK. But that place-based funding is definitely a shift that we're seeing, and I think that is also a credit to UKRI. And UKRI now have place as one of their strategic objectives.
And yourself, Professor Graham?
Just to kind of add to that, I mean, I do think that UKRI recognises the importance of better understanding the Scottish research and innovation ecosystem and how to work with Scotland in order to support that. I think one of the challenges is ensuring that the types of funding approaches that are put in place don't inadvertently reduce opportunities for Scotland, such as recognising our high level of small SMEs as opposed to our major kind of industrial sectors. In terms of things I think we could do, I think the point has been made about co-shaping funding approaches with UKRI in a way that is informed by our understanding of what works for Scotland and also with other devolved nations who share some of the same problems around a high level of SMEs. There's UKRI invests in a quite substantial number of institutes and major infrastructure. It's very difficult for them to change funding into those quickly, but there does need to be a consideration of a shift of how you might do that in a way that benefits Scotland, because having those large-scale investments can act as a catalyst for private sector and inwardly also supporting careers and skills. We've touched upon a little bit some of the challenging funding landscapes. For example, Research England invests in a number of schemes, such as research culture, policy, facilities, that we do not have similar funding streams for. And what that means is that we are on the back foot, or there's not really a level playing field for our universities and our partnership with other organisations in terms of delivering our research and innovation. And just to give you one example that I think illustrates that, there's been a 78% increase in England in their higher education innovation funding, while in Scotland we've seen a 10% decrease in our innovation. What that means is that as universities and other organisations, we have less money to invest in delivery of innovation and commercialisation in a way that helps us drive our outcomes from our basic science in a way which helps with commercial benefit, economic growth and creation of jobs. There are some schemes as well that have been stopped by UKRI, such as Strengthen Places Fund. That was a real success for Scotland. So Scotland have 3 Strengthen Places bids, which were 82 million of investment alongside collaboration with clinical and private sector partners. That was a quarter of the Strengthen Places funding. And that type of scheme is a really significant opportunity for Scotland to invest in clusters of excellence, which helps drive our research and our innovation.
I just want to make the one point around the innovation funding that Professor Graham just mentioned. What we've seen in England is that has increased dramatically compared to Scotland, but it hasn't been at the expense of other parts of the funding model, and I think that's a really important point. So what we mustn't see in Scotland is an increase in that innovation funding at the expense of the research funding. We need to see an increase, a real terms increase in that innovation funding.
Okay, and if we look at innovation funding that comes from Innovate UK, we already heard in a previous evidence session that Scotland gets 5.9% of Innovate UK funding, but actually Scotland provides 11.4% of UK researchers. So does Scotland actually receive a fair proportion of Innovate UK funding? Maybe just start yourself, Professor Pearce.
So we certainly don't get our fair share. That it is a business-led funding mechanism, so it's funding for businesses. Some of that funding can flow to universities, and actually in Scotland, the universities make up a bigger proportion of that Innovate UK funding than happens in England. So as far as the universities are concerned, we are very engaged with Innovate UK funding, but the proportion to Scotland as a whole is less than it is in the rest of the UK.
Should there be changes in how Innovate UK determines funding for Scottish universities to try and...
No, I mean it's competitively won, and I think what we need to do is just encourage and work more closely with our industry to be more competitive in getting access to Innovate UK funding.
So it's your mind it's effectively a challenge for the universities rather than any changes to Innovate UK?
I don't see any obvious changes to Innovate UK from a Scotland perspective, but my colleagues might want to comment.
Yeah, Professor Brown, then I'll come to yourself.
There's quite a lot of work being done on this, certainly by University of Scotland, who may be able to provide more information. What it looks like, one of the issues here is the different size and shape of the industrial base in Scotland compared to the size and shape of the industrial base south of the border, where Scotland, I think, typically has more SMEs, and those SMEs find it more difficult to apply for and receive Innovate funding. And that's probably what's driving that share there. As Professor Pearce has said, the universities do pretty well for Innovate in Scotland, but what we need to do is generate more of those funding opportunities which are appropriate to the business size and shape of Scotland to drive that Innovate share, the total Innovate share up.
Is there suggested changes that could be considered for Innovate UK that would actually assist SMEs then to access that funding?
I think Innovate probably need to look, and I'm sure they are looking at how they fund businesses of different size and scale, and how they can interface then with, for example, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise as well, to make that join up. I think all of us around this table would find the innovation landscape probably the most complex funding landscape that there is actually, and how those bits come together and join together. Innovate have a key role, but so do other partners in that space.
Professor Graham, you had your hand up.
I was going to make exactly the same point as my colleague, which came back to my point about working with UKRI and other funding organisations for them to understand the particular innovation ecosystem of Scotland, and then how do you set up opportunities around funding that align to and would work with Scotland.
Okay.
I think there's on this issue that
precisely on that point, actually.
Well, David and Sally wanted to come in very quickly and briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, just very briefly, Professor Graham, good to see you again. I think we met at the opening of the UK Robotarium. And
yeah, we did.
The UK Robotarium, it just happens to be in Edinburgh, so that's a feather in the cap. But on that point of, in fact, my precise question was going to be for everyone, but I think you gave an answer to my question, which was going to turn Alan Brown's question a bit on its head, because he was asking what if UKRI have an adequate understanding of the Scottish research environment, or as you described it, the Scottish research ecology or ecosystem, I think you said. And I think you've just given me, or given us, one example. I was wondering if the rest of the panel could give us a specific example of where UKRI have actually failed to understand something about the Scottish research ecosystem. Because I think all the examples you've given us so far are failings in the system, but failings for everyone, not specifically for Scotland necessarily. And I was just wondering if there's any particular lack of understanding of the Scottish ecosystem that you could put your finger on. And maybe ask Professor Graham to expand on the example you just gave just a moment ago, while everyone else thinks of one.
Well, I think the point around our high number of small SMEs and the challenges that presents for them in terms of match funding and investment into driving innovation then becomes problematic in engaging with schemes that UKRI might set up, which actually require that significant amount of match funding. So there's a number of examples of that, but it comes back to my point about if you want to drive excellence and opportunity within a particular geographical region or a particular country, you need to understand exactly what the component pieces are within that country, and then how might you invest and enable that in a way that aligns to the, in the case of SMEs, for example, their opportunity to engage and benefit from funding schemes. And so I think that to me has been the challenge, is that we're 4 countries within a country, but we're all different, and even within parts of a country we're different in terms of what opportunities we might have to deliver research and innovation.
Maybe Sally Ann's got a supplementary to this too. Maybe it could help with if it's on this particular.
If I could just ask, I'm not going to ask a question, but if in answering Sally Ann's question, if anybody has any other examples, I'd be grateful.
I was just giving them time to think of an example to make Sally Ann's question.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to follow up on the RI funding mechanism, which predominantly benefits bigger businesses rather than SMEs, which are missing out on the opportunities. Do the SMEs form clusters, SME clusters in particular sectors?
I think there are. Sorry.
Yes,
Also, if you've got an opportunity to answer Mr. Dukett's question too, that would be helpful.
I think there are clusters forming around, for example, semiconductors, photonics, quantum technologies, and in fact, we could probably characterise that as one supercluster. And I think it's a supercluster that could probably rival anything else in the UK. And so I certainly think that is a good example of where that exists, and that often is made up of quite a lot of SMEs.
Okay, thanks.
So I think, there are other significant clusters as well. So, for example, in defence and aerospace and security, there's a very significant cluster, and that bridges right from very small SMEs right through to major multinationals. There are also ones sat in life sciences as well. So those clusters do exist. I think just to come back to your question, one area where I know individual researchers have found issues is around regionality, where occasionally it's impossible to subdivide Scotland into regions. So when you're Scotland looked at from down south, Scotland looks like one region, and when you're trying to code up into smaller regions, as all of us around this table are aware, Scotland is more than one place, and we need to be able to express place in a way that fits the research problems that we're talking about.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry, Sally, were you?
I think Graham wanted to respond.
Right, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think a really good example actually of how SMEs have come together to work effectively to create a kind of consortium to engage effectively with UK funding is in the creative industries, where actually you typically end up with really quite small, technology companies, and where they struggle individually to engage in funding, but as a collective end up with greater strength, including the opportunity to then work with bigger players in that sector. So there's examples of that, certainly through the University of Edinburgh, where we have very strong creative and digital industry work. And actually, when I was the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Enterprise, Creative Industries was funded through a Strengthened Places bid in Cardiff, which again was seen through a very significant consortium. So that's a good example of how SMEs can work together in order to place themselves in a competitive position for funding.
You'll have to move forward. Alan.
Thanks, Chair. Just to round off, so somebody in one of their answers said innovation funding is quite a complex picture. I think it was yourself, Professor Graham, was talking about needing to understand component pieces as well. Now, I'm just going to give a quote that's from the Scotland Office Annual Report and Accounts from April 2022 to March 23. And they've said the Scotland Office is working with other UK government departments to maximise the impact of innovation spending in Scotland. So the Scotland Office is doing that work behind the scenes with other UK departments. I'm just wondering if any can detail any interactions your institutions had with the Scotland Office, in terms of Scotland Office asking what maybe needs were, or how you'd access other funding so that they could then do the liaison they're saying they're doing with other UK government departments. So just if any can illustrate direct contact you've had on that, Professor Pearce.
I'm happy to. I mean, we've certainly had contact with the Scotland Office around the area of semiconductors and quantum technologies, because these are big UK government strategies that have been published this year. There is significant funding associated with that, and we have been engaging with the Scotland Office about demonstrating where the strengths of Scotland can play into that broader UK strategy. So as we go from delivering a strategy to actually implementation of that strategy, I think it's really important that Scotland's strengths and the opportunities for Scotland are heard, and that's the interactions we've been having around that.
Yeah. And has that been able to demonstrate, I mean, he's talking about strategy, so has that formed a path or a way forward that will actually access additional funding then, in terms of?
I think it's about, at this stage, it's about making sure that Scotland's strengths are visible to UK government, because we're still at the stage where the funding needs to flow from those strategies.
Has anyone else got any other examples where the Scotland Office actually been in contact with you to actually get, information about how innovation spending could be maximised in Scotland? Professor Graham.
I mean, I can follow up the discussions with Chris. We also have conversations with the Scotland Office in order to understand opportunities around engagement with the UK government. And of course, the recent award of the exascale supercomputer to the University of Edinburgh, which will be the first in the UK and first, obviously, therefore in Scotland, is a good example of working effectively with UK government to think about how we can have investment in internationally leading world-class facilities, which will help drive both UK government focus on data, artificial intelligence, as well as the focus in the national innovation strategy around those areas as well. So we do see good examples of where we work in collaboration and we engage strongly in terms of opportunities where Scotland is well placed to deliver a unique need for Scotland and for the UK.
So, I mean, that's very positive. Did you have to do any competitive bidding for that, or did that just come about through direct collaboration?
Well, it comes through ongoing engagement and discussion around the needs of the UK and Scotland in this particular sector.
So there's no competitive bidding, there's effective negotiation, collaboration.
I wasn't fully involved in the discussions around the award, so I can't comment on that.
It'd be good if you just got confirmation of whether it was competitive bidding or if it was, collaboration, if you can maybe write following this.
Okay, thank you. Sally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our panellists. Just looking at the City, Region and Growth Deals programme, which could deliver more than $8 billion of investment across Scotland, how have the City Region deals affected private investment in your universities? Professor Brown.
Yeah, I'll kick off, and I'm sure everybody has a tale to tell here. So we are part of the Tay Cities City Region deal alongside colleagues at Dundee. So for St Andrews, we had roughly 28 million, I think. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. And we have invested all of that in developing effectively an innovation campus and innovation space for the university. This is our Eden campus. It's 5 miles outside St Andrews. And this is a site where we are showing how net zero can be achieved through the use of smart technologies coming out of universities, but very much joining together with industry to bring industry in and provide the kinds of space that industry need and the kinds of facilities that industry need to be able to develop that technology. For example, last month we opened the Colin Vincent Battery Technology Centre, which provides one of the UK's leading facilities to deliver batteries at industrial scale prototype level, based on the kinds of technologies which are being developed in universities across Scotland and the wider UK, but also to give industry the space it needs to experiment in. Another area that's working well there is we've built the Darcy Thompson Simulator, which provides industry with the opportunity to develop digital twins of areas that they're interested in and look at how they can fuse data together to answer significant problems. And that, for example, is bringing, we have partnerships with Scottish Power coming in to look at that sort of space, as well as helping the wider community do that. One key thing for us, I'm sorry, this is a long answer, is how investing in that campus with City Region money is also enabling the community around that campus to benefit. So we're seeing, and this is St Andrews small scale, we're seeing primary school roles dramatically increased in the area. We're seeing house building begin to occur in that area, which has been unlocked through this kind of funding, which is also then flowing industrial funding into the university and the space.
Just picking up on that before we move on, that £28 million funding is the university. How are those businesses or the opportunities, so funding of the let's say nature-based or climate change innovative solutions, how are those being funded? Not through that 28 million, right, just through the...
That 28 million has provided us with the facilities,
yeah,
and the infrastructure to enable industry to come in and work on the problems that they're interested in. So we can then bring industry into that space, and the idea with that space is that space, industry pay rent to come into that facility effectively and work with us, as well as then working with bringing in research funding to work alongside academics to deliver on problems.
So in terms of the businesses, so I've asked the Chancellor, you've heard of the Big Society Capital Fund. Mm-hmm. If we could have a similar mechanism for nature-based climate change innovation, that's the sort of thing that would do quite well for our innovative industries, that we need to get the private sector to lead our nature-based solutions, climate change.
Well, I don't know the full details of that fund, but it sounds like it would be a very interesting model to have a look at, certainly, about how we could support industry in that way. And it's not just industry coming new into this, it's every industry that's needing to make the change and how that change can be made. So, for example, on that site, we've invested in 1 megawatt of solar power and battery to enable actual true net zero to be achieved on that site, and use that as a pathfinder model for the university and the region for how you do net zero.
Okay, thank you. That was a very full answer. Sorry, Professor Gibson.
Yes, so we've also received money via the TAFE Cities deal, as Professor Brown said. We're investing it in a biomedical innovation hub. So the 20 million, we're using that as leverage for a £40 million investment in that area, drawing money from charity, philanthropy and commercial investment to answer the issue that I mentioned before, that we build them and then they leave. So to try and provide a facility which allows our very successful spin-out operation to then stay in Dundee and to create the economic knock-on effects that will have. So we've had independent economic assessment of that particular project, which predicts that some 280 new biomedical jobs will be created by 2033, rising to 800 new jobs and over £190 million benefit to the local economy by 2053. So that we have the thing that's the difficult ingredient is the skills. So we're using this investment and leveraging that investment to build that infrastructure that we don't have at the moment. How can government continue to incentivise that kind of development is innovation, so cradle to grave innovation investment, which will aid that commercialisation, but also supporting and co-investing with private sector life sciences real estate, because it's that real estate issue in cities like Dundee. And also, I mean, the development at Guardbridge outside of St Andrews is a real estate issue, and the knock-on that then has to communities which can really benefit from that investment.
Thank you. Professor Pearce.
Yeah, so the Glasgow City deal, I think, was probably one of the first, in fact. We had... So one example of the investment we had from that was £16 million from that city deal that enabled us to establish the university's imaging centre of excellence. So it's got state-of-the-art imaging technology, as well as the establishment of a clinical innovation zone around that. And that created purpose-built space for industry partners to co-locate. And then that initial investment, as well as the kind of partnerships that it generated, that subsequently unlocked further investment, and Professor Graham mentioned it earlier. We then secured, as a result of that, UKRI Strength in Places Fund money to build the Precision Medicine Living Lab project, which has enabled us to really build on the excellent research that goes on in the University of Glasgow, but also to address the adoption of healthcare innovation into clinical practice. And the benefits of all of this is that, and also we are now, as a result of that, now building a new health innovation hub. And all of this is happening within the Glasgow Riverside Innovation District, and that ultimately will lead to improving health outcomes, as well as driving economic development for Glasgow, but also particularly for that particular area of Glasgow Govan, which is one of the most deprived areas, and tackle issues around deprivation as well.
Fantastic. Professor Graham.
So our city deal, which I touched upon earlier, was overall 1.3 billion across a range of areas, and we had 300 million for our data-driven innovation programme, and that is designed to support 10 key sectors such as fintech, agritech, robotics, such as the National Robotorium that we mentioned earlier, and health. And it's in collaboration, one of those, like the robotics Institute, is in collaboration with Heriot Watt. And it's really about using and enhancing data and digital tech in a way that accelerates innovation for organisations within the region. That's been really quite impactful. We've already had significant multi-million industry-focused investments, such as 20 million into a new Centre for Healthcare and Ageing Research, as well as investment into artificial intelligence ethics. But key to our City deal is also supporting startups and new companies. So we do a considerable amount of support and investment in that, which has led to over 300 million plus investment in a large number of technology companies, as well as also job creation, of which we estimate is currently 2,000. We're only 5 years into our City deal, so I feel that there's an opportunity to really accelerate the work that we've put in place, and as others have commented, that investment is in capital and it is match funded through ourselves and other organisations to really accelerate and drive it. And I think there's an interesting question for us, given the sizable investments we've already had into City deals in Scotland, how we build on those and how we really ensure they can continue to drive forward innovation, outcomes and economic growth.
It's interesting because all the universities seem to have chosen a sort of different areas, so you're not in competition with each other, which is very sensible, although competition does breed. Anyway, just so apart from the City deals, is there any other way that the UK government incentivises private investment into the universities? Does anyone have a... Yes.
Well, I'm happy to pick up on the Levelling Up Innovation Accelerator that we had in the Glasgow region, the recent investment zone that's been announced, as well as place-based impact acceleration that we've seen coming out of UKRI. And these have been really important in engaging with local industry.
I just saw on our screen that our Levelling Up Minister was doing a Levelling Up statement this afternoon, and I noticed there's a 1 billion fund that's just been announced. Mm-hmm. So go for that. Brilliant. Just lastly, we know partnership working. So, for example, partnership working between schools and further education colleges with local businesses are really important for that employer-led skills education in skills. So what are your universities doing to connect with industry for the commercialisation of research and skill sets? And could the UK government do more to support that? And do you want to, forge closer relationships with industry for commercialisation of research and skills? Professor Brown.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, St Andrews, you may have an image of St Andrews as quite an old-fashioned university, if you like. I know you were there earlier on. I think, and I would say we've changed considerably in the last 5 or 6 years, frankly, about how we do this. We all recognise the importance of industrial funding of research and innovation activity, and we recognise the importance of growing that. Other universities will be further down the line than we are on that, frankly, as we sit along this table. But it's very interesting to see how that happens, and I think it's really important that we recognise that industry funding isn't just about a transaction. Industry funding is about building the relationship between the researchers and the partners involved, and the key is to build those partnerships, and from those partnerships we'll see the kind of funding that we require. What's really important though is that we ensure that we maintain our own research, which is creative, discovery-led, which is about the problem and the issues that the researchers want to bring to the table and the researchers want to work on, without necessarily always taking everything in an applied direction which suits a particular industry at a particular moment in time. Yeah. And I think that's partly the job of the universities that are sat at this table, to do that, whilst recognising that they live in this wider ecosystem and they must contribute, working with industry, to the greater good of Scotland and the UK.
Thank you. Professor Gibson.
So, Dundee's got an outstanding track record with industrial collaboration, and I completely agree with what Tom's just said. But if you look at something like the Drug Discovery Unit, which works hand in glove with industry, what it's been able to do is to take disease which commercial pharmaceutical firms have not invested large amounts of money in, and develop that original science hand in glove with those firms such as AstraZeneca, Boehringer, etc. So that's the largest drug discovery unit in the world. It's genuinely interdisciplinary, and it's genuinely cradle to grave creation of new drugs. One of the investments in the new innovation hub that we're building in Dundee, the part one, is the Centre for Targeted Protein Degradation, which is the only centre for targeted protein degradation in Europe. And that's a centre which uses an innovative approach to drug creation to develop drugs for disease which are previously thought to be undruggable. So really innovative. And in that case, what we have is industry coming and working in the Centre for Protein Degradation. So Boehringer, Almirall, etc., are sending research teams to come and work with us in Dundee. How do you support the development of that kind of ecosystem of universities working very closely with industrial partners, recognising and incentivising that HEI industrial collaboration as a really important form of inward investment, and in many cases it's foreign direct investment, especially in our case in Dundee. It's as likely to be foreign investment as it is commercial investment as it is UK industry. And then second, really recognising what you've identified, that in Scotland there's a place-based specificity to the areas that we're specialised in. So recognising and supporting and facilitating that is what's needed to then grow that and grow that industrial academic collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Professor Pearce.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that private investment into research is absolutely a critical part of what we do. It's not everything, but it's extremely important. It can help us in leveraging other funding. It can make us more attractive to UKRI funding if we have industrial partners. They directly fund research themselves. They fund PhD students. We are partners with industry on Innovate UK type funding. But I think also more importantly, and going back to Professor Brown's point, it's not simply a transaction. They're not just paying us to do something. Deep long-term relationships with industry are driving new fundamental research questions, going back to that discovery, creativity-driven research. That often can come about also by those long-term deep understanding of industrial problems. So we're not just solving industry's problems, it's also driving new research questions as well. So it's a key part of what we do, and certainly at the University of Glasgow we're investing significantly to be one of the most entrepreneurial universities in the UK, investing in how we engage with our industry partners.
So what you're saying is that sort of relationship between university and industry is up to the university and the industry, and the government really has not much to do with that. Is that what you're saying? Because actually you're doing it, you're building the reputation up, you're doing the research, you're attracting the industry to come and use you because you've proved that you can deliver, and
I think you're
good.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the big organisations that have significant R&D funding, then they can invest in long-term relationships with the universities. But going back to the point we've made earlier, it's smaller, it's SMEs where they often are looking in a much more short-term strategy, and so they do need support from government to incentivise them to de-risk that long-term working with universities, which I'm sure they want to do, but often our business models don't match, and so they do need that government support.
Thank you. Professor Graham. Finally, sorry.
No, it's really not an issue. So, I mean, the University of Edinburgh recognised quite a while ago the importance of collaborating with industry and supporting the generation of new companies through our subsidiary Edinburgh Innovations. Since establishing that, we've seen a threefold increase in our industry and translational income. We currently have 100 student startup companies a year, and the university has moved to 4th in the HEBC rankings around commercialisation and entrepreneurship. We also, because we're proving ourselves quite successful in that approach, that also then generates funding that we can invest in our own venture capital funds to support companies working with other venture capital organisations. So the university and universities, if you heard, in Scotland are playing a really fundamental role in driving commercialisation, translation and working in partnership, and it's really, really important to us that partnership and collaboration with the private sector. In terms of governments generally, for the Scottish Government, investment into the recommendations in the new National Innovation Strategy would be really important. And also I think it's quite important to signal the recommendations from the Stewart and Logan report, which was around women entrepreneurs, which noted that only 1 in 5 women are entrepreneurs, and those 1 in 5 get 2% of the investment. So if we really want to diversify our opportunities for innovation in Scotland, thinking about how we invest in half the population to also consider and engage in entrepreneurship would probably be a good strategy, and there's significant, really exciting recommendations in that report that could be considered. With regards to governments more generally, I think it's about ensuring that there is proof of concept pump prime funding, both for staff within our organisations that want to become entrepreneurs or set up their own companies or test their ideas into a market, as well as for other businesses that are also looking to either work with us or themselves think about how they develop new ideas. And we came on to the point earlier about Innovate UK and how we drive up that 5.9% into Scotland through how we support businesses to engage with Innovate UK, and also the innovation pillar through Horizon Europe, which is a significant opportunity for us. And I think just creating a kind of tax incentive environment where investing in research and development across a range of sectors, including going beyond those that traditionally invest in research and development, we talked about creative industries earlier, would be really advantageous in terms of creating that sense of an environment that is supportive of taking research into outcomes and supporting those who are taking the risk of doing that, whether it's an individual or it's an organisation.
Thank you. Just picking up on your 100 startups. We're very proud of that. What?
We're very proud of that.
That's really good. We're very good as a country of investing in startups, and I know the Chancellor, I think, mentioned it last week, didn't we? We're leading the world in venture capital startups. We're not very good at growing our businesses. So have you got any stats on, those students that start up? Are they managing to grow their businesses and increase productivity and employ more people?
Yeah, so we do quite well with the kind of stickiness of the companies once they've started up. It's when they start to scale up that they struggle with investment and the attraction of moving out of Scotland. So we're good at spinning out companies, we're relatively good at those companies continuing to do well for a period of time. It's the scale-up phase that we struggle with. So when I talk to individuals who are looking to expand their companies, that's where they struggle with the opportunities within Scotland, and where it becomes more attractive to look for sizable investment outside of Scotland. So I do think that there's a need to really think about how do we keep our talent and our entrepreneurship in Scotland in order to really boost that economic growth, and in turn to create the wealth that continues to invest in an ongoing accelerating innovation ecosystem.
Thank you. Other questions?
Right on 5:30. Well done, Sally, and as always. And thank you all for attending this afternoon. I think there's a couple of things that you said you would maybe get back to us, and I'm sure our clerks will remind you of that. But we knew this would be, again, another fascinating session. But if there's anything you feel you could usefully contribute to this ongoing inquiry, please get back in touch with the committee. We're always open to receive further representations. But for this afternoon, order, order.